أكبر الله أكبر.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Inshallah, today we're going to be speaking about the month of Jumada Al-Ula, and we are currently in the month of Jumada Al-Ula, and it's the 4th of Jumada Al-Ula today, inshallah. So inshallah, we're going to be speaking about this month, the origins of this month, any virtues that this month has, and also we'll speak about some of the important incidents which took place in the month of Jumada Al-Ula throughout history. First of all, with regards to significance of this month and virtues, there aren't any specific virtues of this month, or for Jumada Al-Ukhra or Jumada Al-Akhirah for that matter. And we mentioned this last month also, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prefers some months over others, Allah prefers some days over others. And from the wisdoms of this is that, for example, when a person is going through a month in which there are no virtues, and then after that month there is another month which has many virtues, it's an opportunity for that person, and this is a mercy from Allah, that he can recharge his batteries, he can prepare, he can have some sort of rest before exerting that effort to take advantage of those virtues in the following month, for example. And so it's from the mercy of Allah that Allah Azza wa Jal has months which have virtues, and then there are other months which don't have virtues, so that a person can alternate and rest, and he can increase his efforts and do more good deeds in those months which are blessed. For example, the month of Ramadan, the month of the Hijjah, and other months which we'll mention inshallah in the future. This month and also the next month are both called Jumada. And Jumada is a word in the Arabic language which is a feminine word. And this is why we don't say Al-Awwal. For example, the last couple of months were Rabi' Al-Awwal and Rabi' Al-Thani or Rabi' Al-Akhir. And this month we say Jumada Al-Ula, we don't say Jumada Al-Awwal, because in the Arabic language, if something is masculine, then you describe it, if it's the first, as Al-Awwal. For example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has no gender, because gender is a creation of Allah. However, in the Quran is referred to in the masculine form, because in the Arabic language you either have masculine or feminine. There are languages where every single noun is either a male or a female. And in the Arabic language, anything which ends, generally speaking, with a ta marbuta, it's feminine. That's the general rule. The point is here, Rabi' al-Awwal and Rabi' al-Akhir are masculine. Jumada is a feminine word. And so you say for feminine words in the Arabic language, Ula, you don't say Awwal. And so this is why these two months are called Jumada Al-Ula and Jumada Al-Ukhra, or Jumada Al-Akhirah, with the ta at the end. So we don't say Jumada Al-Awwal or Jumada Al-Akhir. You say Jumada Al-Ula, because Ula is the feminine version. If you're describing something that's first, and that thing you're describing is feminine, you would say Ula. For example, if a woman or if a girl came first in the competition, you would say Hiya Al-Ula, she is the first. And of course, Allah is also called Al-Awwal. So that's with regards to masculine. Feminine, we say Al-Ula. This is why this month is known as Jumada Al-Ula. And the next month is also called Jumada Al-Akhirah or Jumada Al-Ukhra. Another thing with regards to these months is that not only are they feminine words, but also we may have heard sometimes these months, or specifically the second month, being referred to as Jumada Al-Ukhra or Jumada Al-Akhirah. Even myself right now, I mentioned both. I mentioned Jumada Al-Ukhra and I also mentioned Jumada Al-Akhirah. And so, scholars discuss and speak about which one should be used. Should it be Ukhra or should it be Akhir or Akhira with the ta because it's feminine? Should we say Jumada Al-Ukhra or should we say Jumada Al-Akhirah? And Ukhra refers to other, meaning the word Ukhra refers to other. If I said, for example, هذه زجاجة أخرى, this is another bottle, for example. So you're referring it as another bottle, an extra bottle, another bottle, a different bottle. Whereas if you say هذه زجاجة آخرة, this is the last bottle, meaning there are no bottles that are going to come after this. And so both words have different meanings. And some of the scholars and some of the historians and linguists, they say Jumada Al-Ukhra is fine, and they also say Jumada Al-Akhirah is fine. Other scholars, they say it's better for a person to say Jumada Al-Akhirah in the linguistic sense. Of course, Islamically, there is no issue here because these months don't have any religious kind of connotation or religious ruling. They're just names of months. They don't have any haram origins or shirki origins, like, for example, the days of the week in England, in the Western calendar, or the months, etc. So they say it's better if somebody says Jumada Al-Akhirah, Jumada Al-Akhirah, as opposed to Jumada Al-Ukhra. And they say because when you say Jumada Al-Ukhra, the other Jumada, it's almost like as if there are many others, or there are going to be others apart from those. Whereas if you say Jumada Al-Akhirah, the last Jumada, there's not going to be any Jumadas after that. So you say Jumada Al-Ula, the first Jumada, Jumada Al-Akhirah, the last Jumada. And there are no others. Whereas if you say Jumada Al-Ukhra, the other Jumada, there could be others as well on top of this. So it makes it more definitive, the first Jumada, the last Jumada. But again, as we said, this isn't really a big issue, but it's something interesting which the scholars have discussed and the scholars of the Arabic language have spoken about. Where does the word come from, Jumada? What does it actually mean? We mentioned before in previous months that origins of these names of the Islamic calendar most likely existed, in fact they all existed, prior to Islam, prior to the coming of the Prophet ﷺ. These are months which were given these names prior to the coming of Islam, and the origins of the names of those months came for different reasons, or from different reasons. And this month it was called Jumada, both first and last Jumada, Jumada Al-Ula and Jumada Al-Akhirah. They were called by this name Jumada because water used to tatajammad, it used to come together, meaning it used to freeze. Water used to freeze during that period of time. And as a result of this, it used to become very, very cold, like a severe cold. And the Arabs, they would also say Jumada Khamsa, interestingly. They would say it's the fifth Jumada. Why? Because Jumada Al-Ula is the fifth month of the Islamic calendar. So, why did they call it Jumada? Because the word Jumada has an origin which means when water comes together and when water freezes. تتجمد. تتجمد الماء. كانت تتجمد فيه. That the water used to freeze in those months, in these months. And so they called the month Jumada because the water used to freeze. It was particularly cold. Now a question. Islamic months, they, over a period of 13, 14, 15 years, go through every season of the year. So how is it this month was given this name if Islamic months actually go through all the different seasons of the year? How is it given this name, which means that the water during this month would freeze if at one point in time Jumada Al-Ula, Jumada Al-Akhirah were also in the summer? The scholars, they say that at the point in which this name was given to this month, Jumada Al-Ula and Jumada Al-Akhirah must have been in the winter. And so they gave these names when these months were in the winter and when the water froze, and so these names just stuck. These names just stuck. And of course we mentioned other names, Jumada Khamsa. Some of the people in the past used to call it Jumada Khamsa, the fifth Jumada, because the fifth month of the Islamic calendar, and what they mean is that It's the 5th month of the Islamic calendar, starting from the first month of the Islamic calendar, and so they would just call it Jumada Khamsa because it's the 5th month. So after Muharram, Safar, Rabi'ul Awwal, Rabi'ul Thani, you have Jumada Al-Ula. Other names were also given to this month. For example, Samah or Hunayn, or they would also call it Runna. And these were just names that had other meanings that they would also use for this month. The word Runa, they say Runa to shay غايته في الحر والبرد أو غيرهما. Meaning, the word Runna came from the word Runa. And Runa to shay, the Runa of something, meant the pinnacle of something. So the pinnacle of heat or the pinnacle of cold. And so they also call this month Runna, and these other names as well. So why do we call it Jumada now? Why do we call it these other names? Because some of the names stuck, some of the names didn't stick, some of the names became more common, more popular amongst the people. Other names maybe weren't used after a period of time. And this is the case with, months in the Western calendar also. They may have given certain names, or they were pronounced differently or mentioned differently in terms of spelling or in terms of what they were, in terms of the word itself. And then certain names are used, certain names aren't used. And so these names weren't as common, and it just became known as Jumada. Also, Hantam was another name. Hantam was another name for this month, for Jumada Al-Ula. And Hantam means As-Sihab Al-Aswad, black clouds. So again, you have many names, but Jumada Al-Ula is the month, the name of the month which just stuck, and it was used regularly by the people. And some of the Arabs used to call the winter season, which is Ash-Shita, which is winter, they used to call it Jumada. So the actual whole season of the winter was actually called, a long time ago before Islam, in the days of Jahiliyyah, they used to actually call it Jumada. Even, for example, the common Arabs at the time, and they would call it Jumada because, as we said, the word Jumada refers to water freezing, and so they use the word Jumada because, of course, in the winter it becomes very cold, and so the word was used. But as we said, time would change, and then people would just end up using different words for different seasons and for different months. As we said, there are no specific virtues for this month, and there are a number of incidents which occurred in the month of Jumada Al-Ula. And inshallah we're going to go through some of these incidents and some of the benefits and virtues of these incidents that occurred in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. From these incidents is a battle called Ghazwa Dhat al-Salasil. Ghazwa Dhat al-Salasil. And this battle was a battle that took place in the 4th year of the Hijrah. Interestingly, there was no actual fighting taking place in this battle. So the companions left with the Prophet ﷺ. They were intending to meet the enemy, and no actual fighting took place because the enemy did not engage. The enemy were not there when they went, and so the Muslims returned back. The journey was a very difficult journey. It was a long journey, and there were other things which occurred and other things which were legislated as a result of this battle. Again, it's called the battle, but no actual fighting took place. The battle of Dhat al-Salasil. From those things which was legislated, either on the way going or on the way back, as a result of the fear that the companions had for this battle and for the enemy, and not the fear for the enemy, but they were concerned about being ambushed and being attacked, was the prayer of fear, a prayer known as Salatul Khawf. Salatul Khawf is a prayer where you pray the obligatory prayers, but the manner in which you pray them is different to the manner you normally pray when you're praying in congregation. And Allah mentions ayat in the Quran referring to Salatul Khawf, and Essentially what happens is that one group stays one row. If there's like multiple rows, if there are multiple rows, then you make multiple rows, okay, so that the rows have different goals or different ahkam and rulings in the salah. When the imam leads the salah, for example, the first row will follow the imam for the ruku. When he goes into ruku, the second row will stay standing. It's quite interesting. The second row will stay standing, and they'll be observing to make sure nobody attacks. And then this first row will come up, the second row will go down, or the second row will stay standing until the first row performs sajda. When they get up from sajda, for example, or when they get up from the first rak'ah, the second row goes down and performs the actions of the rak'ah. So this prayer of fear, Salat al-Khawf, was something which was legislated during this time. On the way back, another incident occurred, which the Messenger of Allah ﷺ mentions, where a man came upon the Prophet ﷺ and the companions as they were returning, and they were very tired and they had gone to sleep. And this man was an enemy of Islam, an enemy to the Muslims. He hated the Prophet ﷺ, and he saw that the people were tired. He saw that this man, the Prophet ﷺ, this man Muhammad, he's lying down, he's sleeping under the tree, under a specific tree, and his sword was hanging on the tree, and nobody was around to protect the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And so he thought to himself, this is a perfect opportunity to go through this crowd or through these people who are just sleeping on the floor, and they're all knocked out. So I'll take his own sword and I'll kill him with his own sword, and no one's going to be able to stop me. And so he starts making his way through the path, through the companions who are all sleeping. And out of tiredness, none of them are awake. They don't wake up. And as they make their way through, as he makes his way through the crowd of people sleeping from the companions, radiallahu anhum ajma'in, he makes his way all the way to the Prophet ﷺ. And he takes the sword that was hanging on the tree, the sword of the Prophet ﷺ, unsheathes it. And he raises the sword in front of the Prophet ﷺ, about to kill him. At that point in time, the Prophet ﷺ wakes up. And he wakes up seeing a man above him with a sword about to kill him. Now imagine the scene. And imagine, for example, you're sleeping and you wake up and there's a gun pointed at your face. Okay, you'd be full of shock, fear. Like you wouldn't know what's happening. The Prophet ﷺ, and you would probably ask for forgiveness and to save you and to not to cause you any harm, and please don't kill me, etc., etc. You beg for your life, and you'll be panicking. Of course, you're confused. You've just woken up. The Prophet ﷺ, his eyes open, and he simply looks at this man. Doesn't panic, doesn't freeze, doesn't say anything even. Just opens his eyes and just looks at this man. And the man's looking back, like thinking, I've got a sword raised in front of you, and you haven't even reacted. You're not even scared. And so he said to the Prophet ﷺ, "Man yamna'uka minni?" Who's going to prevent me from killing you? And the Prophet ﷺ, he said, Allah. Allah will protect me. And there and then, this man, he became paralyzed. He wasn't able to move. And the sword fell from his hand. And straight away the Prophet ﷺ took his sword and raised it above this man. So the tables of 10 now. So he raises the sword above him. And then he says to him, "Man yamna'uka minni?" Who's going to protect me from you? Who's going to protect you from me now? And the man, he says, "La ahad." Nobody. And one narration mentions, he says, "La ahad. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah." After what happens, he accepts Islam. And so, he goes to his people and he calls them to Islam. Another narration mentions he gives the Shahada. And the man, he says to the Prophet ﷺ, that I give you my word that I'm not going to fight you anymore. not going to hurt you anymore, I'm not going to fight the Muslims anymore, I'm not going to be involved in any more battles, any more armies that are going to fight against the Muslims. And I'm not going to be involved with any nations that are fighting you, any tribes that are involved in fighting you. And so the Prophet ﷺ let him go, and he went back to his people, and he said to them, جِئْتُكُم مِّنْ عِنْدِ خَيْرِ النَّاسِ, that I have come to you from the best of people and from the best of men. When this man that I just had this experience with, he's the best of people that I've ever met. And it's interesting how companions would meet the Prophet ﷺ just once, and their experiences will stand out so much that they would, accept Islam. And it shows us the character of the Prophet ﷺ. Sometimes you meet someone for the first time, and maybe you don't meet them again, but you remember them because of how they behaved and because of their personalities, and they stood out. Can you imagine meeting the Prophet ﷺ like the best man who ever lived, with the best of akhlaq? It would be an unforgettable experience. There's an incident when the Prophet ﷺ was interacting with a man, and this man, he was a slave that had been sent by two members of the Quraysh to give grapes to the Prophet ﷺ after the Prophet ﷺ had left Ta'if, where he had been physically harmed because he was calling them to Islam, and he had blood from his head and from his body going down to his sandals, and he was sitting against a wall making dua to Allah, asking Allah for help and for forgiveness. And the men heard him. They sent their slave to give him grapes. They had some grapes. Ta'if is known for its fruit. They had some grapes. They told the slave, go and give this to this man. We feel sorry for him. He's one of our tribal members from the Quraysh in Mecca. So the slave goes and gives him the grapes. And he says Bismillah before eating. And the Arabs don't say Bismillah. So it's very strange for someone who's not an Arab to hear an Arab say Bismillah. It's very uncommon. They don't say Bismillah. They worship idols. They don't have this allegiance to Allah and this loyalty to Allah, and they don't worship Allah alone. And so he asked, I don't hear Arabs saying this. And he's a slave. You have to understand, this is a slave talking to a free man. And we know the perception of slaves, generally speaking. We don't, generally speaking, talk to or inquire or interact with or talk a lot to a person who's a taxi driver who's maybe taking you from one place to another, generally speaking. They're doing their job, for example. I'm not equating taxi drivers to slaves. I'm saying in certain occasions, with certain jobs, with certain people, interactions you might have with them, you don't spend lots of time talking to them. It's just not the norm. Maybe you wouldn't do it. And so he says, I've never heard anyone say this from the Arabs. The Prophet ﷺ says to him, what is your name? Other narrations he says, where are you from? That's very profound, because especially in those days, slaves weren't considered to be anything special. And also his circumstances. He had just come from Ta'if. People had been throwing stones at him. He was bleeding. He would be grateful just for the grapes. You can understand, he must have been exhausted physically harmed, hungry, tired. And so he would have just taken whatever he had without having to ask and inquire and show interest in who this person was. It's like, for example, somebody who is really struggling and suffering and he's exhausted and he's tired, he's all about to faint, and somebody gives him something. You'd just be happy to eat something. If people want to help him, your first priority will be to take care of yourself. And so he says, where are you from? And the slave says, I'm from Nineveh. And the Prophet says, Nineveh, the land of Yunus ibn Matta, Prophet Yunus alayhi salam. The man is so impressed. And he says, how do you know about Yunus? He says, he's my cousin. How? Well, he's my brother. How is he my brother? Because we are both prophets of Allah. And Adaz leaps down, or rushes down, touches the feet of the Prophet ﷺ, kisses the forehead of the Prophet ﷺ, and accepts Islam. This one interaction. And it just shows you the etiquette, the manner in which the Prophet ﷺ is speaking to the slave. Another famous incident is a man who was the most knowledgeable Jewish man in Medina, and his name was Abdullah ibn Salam. And he narrates one of the first hadith about the Prophet ﷺ when he made the hijrah from Mecca to Medina. And he says, when I saw this man enter Medina, عرفت أن وجهه ليس بوجه كذاب. I knew that this man, by looking at his face wasn't the face of a liar. Straight away. And then he narrates the hadith. And he says that I heard the Prophet ﷺ say, أطعموا الطعام وأفشوا السلام وصلوا بالليل والناس نيام تدخلوا الجنة بسلام. He said, spread the salam, feed the poor, and pray during the night while everyone's sleeping, and you'll enter into Jannah peacefully. And this hadith is called the hadith of salam, because Abdullah ibn Salam narrated the hadith. The Prophet ﷺ speaks about the virtues of spreading salam, and he talks about entering into Islam with salam, entering into Jannah with salam, with peace, peacefully. And so it's called the hadith of salam. The point is, Abdullah ibn Salam accepts Islam at that point in time when he sees the Prophet ﷺ, when he hears him speak. Literally, like almost instantly, on that day, the day when the Prophet ﷺ arrived. And then the story mentions how the Jews were praising Abdullah ibn Salam in front of the Prophet ﷺ. When he says he's become a Muslim, they say he's the worst man, he's the worst person we've ever met. Complete disrespect to Abdullah ibn Salam, even though he was their scholar and he was their teacher. Common sense would dictate you find out why he accepted Islam. You follow him, you take his advice, because he's an intelligent person. The point is here, this is also another incident which is mentioned, this incident of the man who attempted to kill the Prophet ﷺ, during this journey of the battle of Dhat al-Salasil. Another battle which took place in the 8th year of the Hijrah, in the month of Jumada Al-Ula, is the battle of Mu'tah. The battle of Mu'tah started because one of the tribes that was allied with the Romans killed a Muslim envoy who was sent to Heraclius. And he stopped at this tribe that was allied with the Romans, and they basically killed him. You don't kill like messengers, you don't kill envoys regardless of which country or which place they are from. And so the Prophet ﷺ sends an army to fight those people at the area called Mu'tah. And he sends Zayd ibn Haritha, radiallahu anhu, the adopted son of the Prophet ﷺ. And then he says, if Zayd is killed in battle, then Ja'far ibn Abi Talib should be the leader. He'll be in charge. Why is he mentioning this first of all? Because he knows this battle will be a difficult battle, otherwise he wouldn't say this. He says if Zayd is killed, Ja'far will be in charge. And then if Ja'far is killed, Abdullah ibn Rawaha should be in charge. And it's said in another narration, and if Abdullah is killed, let the Muslims choose somebody else. And so they're making their way in this army. You have Ja'far radiallahu anhu, of course, you have Zayd ibn Haritha, you have Abdullah ibn Rawaha, you also have Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu anhu. It's the 8th year of the Hijrah. This is just after the conquest of Mecca. This is one of the first battle in which Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu anhu participates as a Muslim. He's just accepted Islam. He accepts Islam just before the conquest of Mecca, so just prior to that. So now they're about to fight. And Mu'tah, by the way, is in modern day Jordan, between Amman and a place called Al-Karak. So it's between those two areas. And he's been a Muslim for a few months, Khalid Walid radiallahu anhu. And what happens, the battle starts, and the battle is so severe that Zayd ibn Haritha is killed. And this is the adopted son of the Prophet ﷺ. Ja'far ibn Abi Talib is the cousin of the Prophet ﷺ. He's one of the senior companions. And he takes charge. Again, the fighting is so severe, he is also killed. Abdullah ibn Rawaha takes charge. And the fighting is intense. The fighting continues until Abdullah radiallahu anhu is also killed. And now there's nobody left. What do we do now? Who shall we choose? And they all turn to Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu anhu. And they say, you have to be the leader. And he says, how can I be? I've been Muslim for a few months. What am I going to do? How am I going to be the leader? There's many other people here who are more senior than me. They said, no, it has to be you. You know, you are who you are. You're the general of of the armies of the past, and you have knowledge of warfare. You're the person. So Khalid radiallahu anhu, he decides to lead because everyone's telling him, so he accepts. And then he orders some of the companions to retreat and to spread out in the distance and to use items, shields and other things to hit the ground so that dust will come up and sand will come up. And when the sand comes up, it's going to drift. And so lots of sand drifting from a distance, when people are watching, they're going to think there are other people who are coming, that reinforcements are arriving. And so the non-Muslims, the Romans, they see the sand from the distance and they're thinking this is the reinforcements arriving of the Muslims. And so they assume this is what's happening. And so they decide to refrain from fighting, to regroup. As they're trying to regroup, getting ready, okay, to reform the army and to change the formation of the army so that they can face the enemy who they think is coming, they decide to reform the army, to change the formation. And as they're reorganizing everything...
What's the name of the battle?
Mu'tah. Battle of Mu'tah, yeah. So as they're reorganizing the army, Khalid Walid radiallahu anhu takes the army and retreats. Because of the severity of the battle, he retreats and he makes his way back to Medina, realizing this is a battle we're not going to win. 3 of the leaders have already been killed, and this is a battle we're not going to be able to win, and so he retreats. And again, there's discussions with regards to retreating in battle. Is it something which is permissible? If a battle is, if a person runs away from battle, this is cowardice. But if it's a tactical retreat, so that you can live to fight another day, and so that, and it's part of tactics and part of strategy, then of course there's nothing wrong with a person retreating for those kinds of purposes and for those kinds of reasons. And in a way, the scholars they mentioned, it was a victory because only 20 or so people were killed on the side of the Muslims. The fighting was so severe. It was one of the first interactions with the Romans, and the way things were going, it was a very heated battle. And Khalid radiallahu anhu, seeing everything, realized this isn't going to work for us. It's not going to happen. And some say it was a loss because, of course, the Muslims were the ones who retreated. Others, they say it was a draw because neither side continued their attack. The Romans were retreating, to regroup, and so the Muslims also retreated and left. And no one had any prisoners of war, and they had a similar number of casualties on both sides. So they say there wasn't really any winner, any real winner on either side. And again, this is the Sunnah of Allah, that sometimes it's the disbelievers who are victorious, and sometimes it's the Muslims who are victorious. And we make dua for success for those Muslims in Gaza and in Palestine, that Allah gives them success and protects those who are being oppressed in that part of the world. Other things which are mentioned with regards to events that took place in the month of Jumada Al-Ula is something which happened in the year 226 Hijrah, so quite a while later. The historians, they say, فِيهِ أُمْطِرَ أَهْلُ تَيْمَاء. This place in Arabia called Tayma. It began to rain, and it was so cold that the rain basically became solid, and it was like not just snow. The narration mentions bayl, that it was like snow, like ice, but it seems that it was solid, like it was hail, like large pieces of hail that were coming from the sky. And it said, قُتِلَ مِنْهُمْ, that there were 370 people that were killed as a result of this hail that was coming down. Solid ice that was coming from the sky was killing people. And Ibn al-Jawzi rahimahullah, he speaks about this incident when he speaks about this this point in time, and he says that in this year 226 it rained, and this rain became solid and it became like ice, and many people were killed. 370 people, he mentioned 360 people were killed, and it destroyed houses. So it was, you imagine, There have been some incidents I've seen on YouTube where big hailstorms occurred and damaged and caused the windows to smash, etc. So it is something which has happened also recently as well. And he said that people, when this was happening, they could hear a voice. They could hear a voice, and the voice was saying, "Irham ibadak, have mercy over your slaves. U'fu an ibadak, forgive your slaves." All this is happening in Taymah, and the people are looking around, and they can see footprints on the ground. They can see footprints on the ground. طولها ذراع بلا أصابع. They could see footprints on the ground. The length of these footprints were a dhira. A dhira is basically from the wrist to the elbow. That was the length of the footprint. So big footprints. بلا أصابع, without any toes. So these people, they're hearing, ارحم عبادك وعفو عن عبادك, have mercy on your slaves, forgive your slaves, and they're looking, can't see anybody, but they can see footsteps on the ground, and these footsteps are like a foot long, and there's no toes on those footsteps on the ground. And they follow the footsteps, and they're looking, and they're hearing the sound, and as they get closer and they're trying to go to where the sound is, where the voice is being heard, they can hear the voice. فَجَعَلُوا يَسْمَعُونَ صَوْتًا, Ibn Jawzi, he says, they go and they can hear the voice, وَلَا يَرَوْنَ شَخْصًا, but they can't see anybody. And so of course this was angels who were supplicating to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to have forgiveness for his slaves, those who were being killed and those who were dying as a result of this freak weather occurrence in the city of Taymah. And so you have these incidents which have taken place. And of course, as we know, rain is something which can be a blessing, and it can also be a curse. It can also be a punishment. And this is why the Prophet ﷺ himself, he would always make dua, and he would say, "Oh Allah, send rain upon us, around us and not on top of us, so that it benefits us and benefits others and benefits the vegetation and benefits the people and benefits the animals, but not so that it causes floods and causes harms." And of course we know the virtues of rain generally speaking, and this is also the case with snow. It's also the case with snow that dua of a person can be responded to by Allah more swiftly in the nuzul al-ghayth, when it rains. The scholars, they say snow is the same thing. It also applies with snow because it's the mercy of Allah descending. It's essentially rain that just basically freezes over and becomes snow. Well, I'm not a scientist, but it's more or less the same thing. It's from the heavens. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responds to a person's du'as when a person supplicates during the mercy of Allah descending from the heavens when it rains or when it snows. And this time of course we all need to be making dua, especially for our Muslim brothers and sisters around the world. And inshallah here we're going to conclude. So just to summarize, Jumada Al-Ula doesn't have any specific virtues, but there were many important incidents which took place, some of the battles, some of the incidents that we mentioned, and of course a person can always take lessons from the historical incidents which took place in the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ and in our history. Inshallah we'll take questions if there's any questions.
Yeah, in the Battle of Mu'tah, who stopped the fighting first? The Muslims or the Romans?
So the Battle of Mu'tah, the fighting was very severe, and then Khalid ibn Walid, he regrouped the Muslims, and he sent a contingent to make it look like reinforcements were arriving. So if you can imagine, there's two armies fighting, okay, and then he sends a group without the other group knowing, without the other army knowing, to kick up the sand so that it looks like there's going to be reinforcements. So once that happens, the general of the opposing army has to now change his formation, the formation of his army, because it's an external threat. Who knows which angle they were coming from? And if that angle is exposed, if they're exposed from that side, they have to regroup now. And so he retreated temporarily to regroup, so that he could prepare for the army that's coming, or for the soldiers that are coming, if it's 50, 100, 200 soldiers. So he temporarily regroups. As he's regrouping, Khalid ibn Walid uses this as an opportunity to retreat and to make their way back to Medina. It doesn't continue fighting. So they were the ones who left the Muslims were the ones who left the battlefield first.
Yeah, and did the fight continue the other day? So
No, they went back to Medina.
oh,
Because of the the people that were killed. Khalid bin Walid wasn't really the one. I mean, he was asked to be the leader, to be the general, to be in charge, but it was only as a result of the other Muslims, other companions being killed, and so he decided to make his way back. And there are narrations which mention some of the companions rebuked them. Why did you come back? And you guys retreated, and you guys didn't continue. But the Prophet ﷺ never said anything to them. And so again, there's the issue of retreating and in what manner it's done. If a person runs away from battle because of fear, that's a different issue. But if it's tactical, and it doesn't make sense to continue fighting. For example, like there's 10 people and they're fighting 100 people. It wouldn't make sense. Inside. Or if you know that you're going to be killed. If you know you're going to be killed, that they're a superior armor, they have this specific advantage, and you know that it's going to cause unnecessary deaths on your side, it would make sense for you to temporarily retreat so that you can go again. And we know that they eventually did fight the Romans at the end of the battles in the future later on. JazakAllahu khair. SubhanakAllahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.